career's gone. But
Round one. Fight!
yeah, the guy in the white hat. No? Oh, yeah.
What's up, man? So, I mean, you mostly just kind of argued against, like, some made-up liberal straw men, which is cool or whatever. Everyone should listen to our podcast, Boof Boys. Google it. It's better than this. It's funnier, too. Oh, but no, I got a question, man. I got a question, dude. You called yourself, don't shut me down. You called yourself alt-right or whatever. I just want to know what your take is on, like, racial IQ differences and stuff. So who's the real leader of the alt-right? Is it you or, like, kind of the Richard Spencer faction? Like, a lot of people like you kind of skirt around the race thing, but I'm curious.
Well, I don't talk about it very much, so I'm not really interested in it. And I've never described myself as alt-right in any interview. So grateful for the kind introduction, but no. I've never described myself as that. In fact, I've gone to many pains to avoid it because I think I'm a fellow traveler on some issues like political correctness. But I find some of that sort of discussion quite distasteful. The furthest I would go is to say that the former New York Times science correspondent wrote a book about trying to explode the myth that race is a social construct. Well, a lot of what you're taught in college is that race is a social construct. It's something that you perform or that is imposed upon you, rather than something that is innate within you. And so this book by Nicholas Wade was trying to demonstrate that there's a statistical sense in which race is real. So we know from various clusters of genetic information where somebody came from. Now that sounds like a very logical thing to say, but he correctly identified that that most higher education institutions are teaching that this stuff doesn't happen. We now they have the computing power to map the genome. We know that race is real in a statistical, biological sense. Now his argument in this book is that some of those clusters of genes can result in different sorts of behaviors, which is why different cultures don't just have different skin colors but look differently. For the IQ difference stuff, I have no clue. I have no reason to believe that's the case. I certainly don't look at the world that way. One of the many reasons I would say the people who push that kind of stuff online absolutely hate me. By the way, they have declared a holy war on me. They've demanded that Breitbart fire me before they will ever read it again. The white supremacists and anti-Semites on the internet fucking hate me. So I think having accused me in the beginning of railing against liberal straw men, I think you are painting with very similar brushes. So
you have to start thinking: is this something that we ought to take seriously, or something that we ought to take with a grain of salt? But I will tell you one area in which there was discrimination, and that is the widespread perception that black people were not getting loans led the federal government to create a subprime lending program specifically designated to get people of minority ethnic status into homes they could not afford with bad credit. Okay, if it had all been lending discrimination, you would have assumed that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac would have been fine. There would have never been a subprime mortgage crisis. In 1995, President Clinton's Housing and Urban Development Department agreed to let Fannie and Freddie get affordable housing credit for buying subprime securities, particularly with regard to low-income borrowers. So white privilege in the United States extends to the fact that if you are not a member of the white privileged class, you have a better shot of getting a subsidized loan from the federal government. And by the way, there are laws on the books in the United States that if you can prove discrimination in lending, you can sue the hell out of these banks. And in fact, banks have had to settle based on historic discrimination. Nothing I'm saying here says discrimination has never existed in America's history. That would be stupid and afactual. But to suggest that it is a continuing factor in American life that is putting people under the boot of the white establishment is just factually nonsense. Okay, style of dress. We talk about white privilege with regard to style of dress. Okay, seriously, this is nonsense. If there is no white privilege with regard to style of dress. Because here's the reality. If you sag your pants and somebody says to you, pull up your pants, and you're a white guy, nobody says a word. If you sag your pants and you're black and somebody says to you, pull up your pants, you will be called a racist. Right? This has actually happened. David Stern, if you remember, who was the head of the NBA, it was implied and actually said in many cases that he was racist for suggesting that people in the NBA ought to dress in nice suits. It turned out that everybody eventually took him up on that, and now NBA players are the best dressed people on planet Earth. But the fact is that style of dress is not an aspect of white privilege. Public speaking skills. They say, well, when it comes to public speaking skills, then white people have an advantage. President Obama is not nearly as articulate as the press would have you believe. Okay, President Obama is not more articulate than John Edwards was, but according to the media, he was the most articulate man who ever lived. He made Jesus look like a piker. President Obama was the greatest speaker in the history of the world. And part of that was because the media gave him affirmative action points. They did. Because if anybody said the sort of inarticulate things that President Obama has said routinely when he's off teleprompter, they'd be raked over the coals for it. Job performance, right? They say there's discrimination in job performance, and this is white privilege. Right? The fact is that Mizzou has affirmative action in its hiring processes. There are already laws on the books that bar discrimination based on race in hiring. There's already a federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission that investigates charges of racism on a routine basis. It has a program. It's called E-Race, Eradicating Racism and Colorism in Employment. It's designed to fight discrimination against people of color. That is not white privilege. That is the government going out of its way to attempt to fight individual racists and, in some cases, go beyond the evidence in order to demonstrate racism. The idea that, especially on college campuses, that black folks on college campuses, people of color on college campuses are suffering from some unspecified white privilege, really talk to the Asian guy who has to score 230 points above the black guy in order to get in the same college before you tell me about white privilege. Okay, the fact is that affirmative action programs across the country, de facto and not de facto and in law as well, all of these programs are specifically created in order to get ethnic minority students with lower SAT scores into the building. Okay, if it's white privilege to sit on the side because you can't go to college because the black guy took your slot because he had a lower SAT score, and it didn't matter that he grew up rich and you grew up poor, right? If that's white privilege, then nobody would want to be a member of the white privileged class. Racial profiling in crime. This is the one that you hear the most often. Right? The police are out to get black folks. Without evidence, we keep hearing that white officers shoot black people for no reason whatsoever. This is absolute nonsense. More white people in the United States die at the hands of the cops than black people. More importantly, blacks are more likely to be killed by police than white people on a percentage basis, but police are less likely to kill black people in the same circumstances. According to Professor Peter Moskos of John Jay College of Criminal Justice at CUNY, City University of New York, quote, if one adjusts for the racial disparity in the homicide rate, or the rate at which police are feloniously killed, whites are actually more likely to be killed by police than blacks. In other words, if you take a look at the murder rate in the black community, which is significantly higher than the murder rate in the white community, and you use those statistics rather than just general population statistics, what you see is that the cops overrepresent in terms of the number of whites that they kill as opposed to blacks that they kill. How about racial profiling when it comes to speeding? Right? You get this one a lot. Driving while black. Well, if you remember back to the 1990s, there was a big hubbub. There was a settlement actually from the state of New Jersey in which the state of New Jersey was accused of discriminating against black drivers. Right? Black drivers were saying that they were being pulled over for no apparent reason. Well, the Department of Justice and the New Jersey Attorney General commissioned a study, and they clocked the speed of all the drivers. Instead of just assuming that everybody drives at the same speed regardless of race, which again was an evidenceless proposition, they actually went ahead and they looked at how do people drive in the state of New Jersey. Turns out that black people sped disproportionately. Blacks were 25% of all the people speeding and 23% of all the people getting speeding tickets. Right? So the idea that just because there's a disproportionality that is evidence of racism, it's just not true. How about sentencing disparities? I mean, as long as we're myth-busting all of this, how about sentencing disparities? Right? There's this idea out there that black people and white people who commit the same crime, they go to jail for different periods of time. And particularly, people like to cite the disparity between crack and powder cocaine sentences. Okay, the fact is that the reason that there is a disparity between crack and powder cocaine sentences is because it is easier to distribute crack, and it is easier to sell crack, and it is easier for people to get high off of crack. And the people who are the moving forces behind the crack powder cocaine disparity were black legislators in inner cities who didn't want people selling crack cocaine in their communities. A majority of black legislators voted in favor of of disparities in terms of crack versus powder cocaine. As early as 1994, the Justice Department surveyed felony cases in the country's 75 largest urban areas. They found lower felony prosecution rates for blacks than for whites. Actually, the truth is that one of the biggest problems plaguing black communities right now is under-policing, not over-policing. It's not finding people who kill people and putting them in jail. It's not finding serious criminals and putting them in jail. There's a great book called Ghettocide by a very leftist journalist named Jill Levy. She talks specifically about this. She says that one of the things that is necessary if you want a better lifestyle in inner city black communities is more law enforcement. You need people to feel protected. The reason people aren't investing in Ferguson, Missouri has nothing to do with racism and everything to do with the fact they don't want to have their store burned down. If you're worried about the property crime rates in an area, you're not going to invest in that area. You want to build up those areas. You need more cops, not less, so stop bashing the cops. Okay, poverty. And the idea is that blacks in America are more impoverished than whites because of systemic racism. Okay, according to the Brookings Institute, which is a very left institute, the Brookings Institute has found that if you want to not be permanently poor in the United States, it's actually very easy. This is a wonderful country. If you don't want to be permanently poor in the United States, you need to do 3 things. Finish high school, get a job, don't get pregnant before you get married. That's it. Seriously, if you do those 3 things, you will not be permanently poor in the United States. Would you like to know why there's a disproportionate poverty rate in the black community? Because there is a disproportionate single motherhood rate and dropout rate in the black community. Okay, as much as we can talk about white privilege, the fact is that the single motherhood rate in the black community in 1960 was 20%. Today, it is upward of 70%. Unless you are going to argue that racism in the United States has more than tripled in the same period of time that the civil rights movement had its great successes, this is nonsense. And again, there's not a white person anywhere that is forcing a black person to sleep with a black person, conceive a child, and then not get married. It's not happening. It is not, there's not a single place this is happening anywhere in the United States. People, and this is true for by the way, white people who are lower, it's true across races. It's not just a race-specific thing. Poor white people are people who are having kids out of wedlock and not finishing high school and not getting a job, right? It's true for everyone. The fact that it's disproportionate in the black community doesn't mean that whites are racist. It means that something needs to change inside the black community, and people need to start taking personal responsibility. I know these words are out of style. Personal responsibility for the stuff that you do.
Round 2. Fight.
Criminalize Black Lives Matter. The left does this insane sleight of hand where they try to suggest that not liking Black Lives Matter is the same thing as hating black people. No one is stupid enough to believe that they know that. No, that nobody falls for that, but they keep doing it. Well, that's dumb, and you can accept that there are things that are wrong in the black community that are not the black community's fault. Like, for example, they need better fucking schools. Without believing that a violent movement that throws its toys out the pram and leaves black communities in ruins is the answer to those problems. Black Lives Matter is crossing over. We are entering the black power phase of Black Lives Matter's existence. And it is crossing over into a terrorist organization. It's time to criminalize it. Number 12. Railing against Pepe the Frog is not going to work. Destroying people over bad jokes is not going to work. It just drives more talented, fun, interesting people like you to the alt-right. I don't think the left is going to do any of these things. Without these things, the alt-right is going nowhere. And it does not live or die by Donald Trump. This is a new populist, conservative, and libertarian movement that is going nowhere so long as the left continues to prioritize Muslim feelings over gay lives. So long as the left continues to prioritize the feelings of sociopathic feminist bitches over everybody else. So long as the left continues to claim that you can't take one member of a group as representative of every member of that group, but all straight white men are awful. So long as the left continues to welcome in terrorism to Western countries, so long as the left language polices and nannies and mollycoddles people, tells you what you can say, what you can do, who you can hang out with, what language you can use, what clothes you can wear, how you can do your hair, particularly upsetting for me. I might like dreadlocks. I think I'd look hot in dreadlocks. So long as they do these things, so long as they don't understand the valid, reasonable grievances that people have in this country and seek to mischaracterize those anxieties that are held by millions as the product of racism and bigotry, so long as that happens, the alt-right is going nowhere. The movement that Donald Trump has spearheaded is going nowhere. It is only going to get bigger. And this room is a vision of what America should look like in 20 years. Systemic racism and white privilege are bullshit. They don't exist. They are systems designed to justify other people's prejudices about you. And it is time to start calling them out. And the best way you can do it is at the ballot box in this election, but you can also do it by coming to talks like this. You can also do it by being the mischievous, trolly, dissident shitlords I know you all are. Until the left abandons not only its visceral loathing of people for no good reason, but also the tactics it uses, the sociopathy, the vindictiveness, the viciousness. So long as the left continues to treat people like shit, we will be here. And we're going to start winning elections. Thank you very much.
I mean, ultimately, it's to bring awareness and make people, realize what's really going on in this country. There are a lot of things that are going on that are unjust, people aren't being held accountable for, and that's something that needs to change. That's something that, this country stands for freedom, liberty, justice for all. And it's not happening for all right now.
Is this something that's evolved as a philosophy in your mind? I mean, how has this kind of progressed that you make a stand like this?
It's something that I've seen, I've felt, wasn't quite sure how to deal with originally. And it is something that's evolved. It's something as I've gained more knowledge about, what's gone on in this country in the past, what's going on currently. These aren't new situations. This isn't new ground. It's things that have gone on in this country for years and years and have never been addressed, and they need to be.
Okay, what a hero, what a hero. And the media are treating him like a hero. He's just a hero, an unbelievable hero. ABC News has a column today by Ian O'Connor. This is from ESPN. And this ESPN, as I've said before many times, and as you know, folks, I'm always right, ESPN is just MSNBC with footballs. And ESPN is praising him. Colin Kaepernick stood tall while sitting down, which is not an easy thing to do. In fact, what he did in benching himself for the national anthem on Friday night was the hardest thing he could possibly do. The easy thing, that would be standing silently with his teammates on the San Francisco 49ers sideline, cutting against the grain of his conscience. Nobody would have known the difference, but he planted himself among the Gatorade buckets, understanding that in an age of 24/7 surveillance, he would be outed soon enough. He didn't strike the kind of dramatic pose made by Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the 1968 Summer Games in Mexico City, and that was okay. He made his statement loudly and clearly, and he said, I'm not going to stand up and show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses black people and people of color. Right, black people and people of color, like Colin Kaepernick, who earns on average $19 million a year for being one of the crappier quarterbacks in the NFL. Again, that wouldn't be the end of the issue. I mean, there are plenty of people who have made lots of money. There are plenty of black people who were making lots of money in 1950 when Jim Crow was still a thing, right? Sammy Davis was making a lot of money in 1960 when Jim Crow was still a thing. But right now, Jim Crow is not a thing. And so now he's promulgating lies for the lapdog media. And the media are just lapping it up. They love this stuff. They love it. And there's somebody I thought who wrote an interesting column who said, if you're booing him, you should really be booing Muhammad Ali, because Muhammad Ali did the same kind of stuff. If you recall, Muhammad Ali did take booze at the time, and he rightly took booze at the time because he said some pretty evil and egregious things. I know we've made a hero out of Muhammad Ali now because he became kind of this American spokesman later in his life, but early in his life, he was saying some pretty vile things about the United States and about the war in Vietnam. But at least back when he was doing it, there was actual serious racial discrimination happening on a systemic level across the country. That simply is not true. It was bad when he said it even then. It's simply not true with Colin Kaepernick now, right? I mean, this is all nonsense. The idea that police are out there just murdering black people, that's all they care about. They're out there killing black people and targeting black people. The criminal justice system is full of racism. All of this is a lie, and we've discussed this about 1,000 times on the program, so no need to go through all the statistics again. I have full videos on this talking about all of these statistical anomalies that the left likes to cite and explaining where they come from. But Kaepernick, first of all, there's something cynical to this. Kaepernick is 5 seconds away from being cut by the San Francisco 49ers for sucking at his job. So he wanted to make this headline, and that way, if he gets cut, he can turn around and say, the real reason they cut me was not because I'm a really crappy football player. The real reason that they cut me is because I am such a standard bearer for Black Lives Matter. Okay, that's worth noting. But here's the thing about Kaepernick. Kaepernick represents the mainstream left. Him not standing up for the national anthem is actually what the mainstream left now believes. Isaiah Thomas, who was the GM of the New York Knicks, one of the worst GMs in NBA history, he said sort of the same thing over the weekend. He said that white silence is violence. This is his line.
I look at white silence in these issues as violence. White silence is the equivalent to violence in these issues.
First of all, silence is not violence. If silence were violence, then right now I'd be punching someone. Okay, but silence is not violence, obviously. But again, look at the people surrounding him, right? Max Kellerman is the guy who's sitting directly to Isaiah Thomas's left, the execrable Max Kellerman, the worst radio talk show host in America. And he's sitting there just nodding along. This is mainstream left thought. And athletes get celebrated for this, and they get ripped if they don't do this, right? If you sit there and you say something like, I don't think America's a very racist place. I think America's a pretty great place. Then you get ripped as a sellout. You get ripped as an Uncle Tom. If you do what Kaepernick did, you get praised by the media, sports and political both. Whoa, what a courageous guy. What a courageous guy. Well, funny, it's only courageous when the guy is earning $19 million a year for throwing a football. You know, it's amazing. Again, if you have the same guy making the same amount of money saying the reverse, which is actually true, that America is the least racist country in the history of the world, and that our cops are not out shooting black people, but are largely protecting black people. That's why they're policing the inner city. Then presumably you would be called a sellout and an Uncle Tom. Michael Eric Dyson, who's a racialist himself, I think he teaches at Georgetown, he says that black athletes should all do what Colin Kaepernick is doing.
Athletes must have enough courage to speak up. You got enough dough, you got enough social currency. Use your mouth to stand up for the very people who made it possible for you to become who you are.
The very people who made it possible for you to become who you are. So number one, the people who made it possible for Colin Kaepernick to become who he is are his white parents who adopted him and raised him. And the people who made it possible for him to become who he is are the people who let him into a college where he could play ball, despite the fact that he probably didn't have stellar academic qualifications. The people who made it possible for him to do what he's doing are a lot of the people who are going to these football games and paying his salary, who are largely white fans. The people who make it possible for him to be who he is are all the cops who are defending those games from terrorist attacks and criminals. Right, the first person that Colin Kaepernick is going to call when somebody tries to break into his house is the cops, just like every other person in the United States. But again, this is now mainstream left thought, and this is the point that I'm building up to, is that this is all part of a broader left. And people talk about the alt-right. The alt-left is the mainstream left. There is no alt-left because there's no mainstream left anymore. It's been totally hijacked by the Black Lives Matter racist movement.
Final round. Finish him!
What has Black Lives Matter actually accomplished? Well, I suggest to you that, and some of my fellow conservatives don't like me saying this very much, but I think that there is a legacy from slavery that requires a response. Now, I'm not saying that I sign up to the full reparations agenda. I think it's ludicrous to punish people for other people's sins. But there are clearly things that black communities need. Infrastructure, schools, housing, stuff they don't have, stuff that is worse there than anywhere else. And I would be completely in support of disproportionately large spending on those areas. But it's spending that will help this community revive itself so that the poorest, smartest black kid can go to Harvard. That's the kind of... That's the kind of thing that might actually help. The problem for Democrats is it removes the victimhood and grievance culture, and that kid might not need welfare anymore. So it takes away a voter. It also offers up the promise of regeneration, of renewal, of aspiration, of the achievement of the American dream for a community that the Democrats are quite happy to keep as they are, so that they keep voting left. What's Black Lives Matter done to fix this situation? Well, all that Black Lives Matter has accomplished is further alienating the races from one another and leaving black cities in ruins. Nothing else. Black Lives Matter has achieved nothing else and has moved race relations several decades backwards. That's it. And people like DeRay Mackison are responsible for that. Sheriff David Clark, who is one of the best lawmen in the country, says it best. This is a room full of libertarians and Republicans applauding a black policeman. Somehow you're still racist. Honestly. Well, Black Lives Matter, he says, has no more to do with black issues than Students for a Democratic Society had to do with democracy. They are a means to an end, and they use the black population as sacrifices for their goals. When black celebrities like Beyonce jump on board, I can only wonder what their goals are. More ticket sales? An easy pass from the liberals who control their contracts? It is certainly not to help their community. Sheriff Clark goes so far as to call it a war, with BLM as the enemy. Sheriff Clark is a serious guy, and when he speaks, in my view, America should listen. And if there is any question who isn't listening to Sheriff Clark, here is a picture, well, no, actually, you know what, I'm not going to call any more of the students here. But it's safe to say that the students at this school are not listening. They support BLM, which is the stunning and brave thing for university colleges to do, but it doesn't help blacks.
That was the crowd that greeted conservative writer Ben Shapiro as he was attempting to give a speech at the Los Angeles campus of California State University. Inside the lecture hall where he had been invited, it went like this. Watch.
Folks, if you're watching on the live stream, the waves of students that you see entering right now are being sneaked in. Because in America in 2016, you have to use the back door if you want to participate in free speech. You get to block the front door if you're a member of the left. And this is how it's written. And there it is, gang. Guess what? You know what? They're not going to stop us.
Ben Shapiro is editor-in-chief at dailywire.com. Ben, great to see you. So they invited you there, this young group, and the university was not happy about it, initially tried to stop it. One professor in particular was ripping down the flyers, threatening students for posting them, but you showed up. Take it from there.
Yeah, well, the president of the university attempted to cancel the speech, and I told him to screw himself. I was coming anyway because that was a violation of free speech rights. About an hour and a half before I was scheduled to come to campus, I didn't know if they were going to try to arrest me or something, he backed down and he said, we'll hold the event. We'll make sure there's enough security that it's safe. I started getting messages on my text and through Twitter that there was violence going down, that there was a huge crowd. By the time we got there were helicopters, cops everywhere. Every single entrance and exit, except for one, had been barricaded and blocked by the students. The police were doing nothing to actually move the students and the protesters so that people who wanted to hear could get in. And by the time I got in, I had to be escorted in not only by my own security, but by an armed coterie of uniformed police officers. And they were sneaking all of the students in 4 at a time through a back door the protesters hadn't yet discovered. And so over the course of the speech, people were coming in.
Public university, they don't understand anything about First Amendment, which is the answer to speech you do not like is not less speech, it's more speech. You don't shut down the initial speech. You have your own event. You offer your own viewpoints. But they were rows deep, threatening you. People were getting pushed around, and the people who wanted to get in to see you were getting stopped by the cops, apparently, you say, under directions from the university?
So basically what I say is that the police officers were doing nothing. They've been told by the university to not move any of the protesters who had locked arms and were blocking off the door so nobody could get through. And there's plenty of video on Instagram and YouTube of these people who are attempting to just get in to listen, being pushed around by members of the audience who are screaming at them, cursing at them, pushing them, assaulting them. A reporter from Breitbart was assaulted 3 times. A man who was disabled with nerve damage, he was assaulted by folks who were protesting. It truly was the fascist left at work.
I take it no apology was forthcoming.
No. No, of course not. The only apology they wanted was an apology from me, and then from the president for allowing me to speak in the first place. Again, I'm a California taxpayer. I pay for all these dolts to go to college here and all these professors to protest and try to tear down flyers. But you know, this is a blatant violation of free speech principles, and more than that, it's just more evidence that there is a movement within the left, a very hardcore fascist movement within the left to shut down speech that they disagree with and to punish physically people who they don't like. And that's why at the very end, I turned to the students and I said, do you want to go out there and confront some of these protesters? And I was told by the police officers, if you do that, there could actually be a riot. They said, we don't have the capacity to protect you or the other students. And I'm talking about 10 uniformed officers at the time who were scheduled to protect me.
Professor Robert Weide, W-E-I-D-E, when people were placing flyers on the board, he apparently went out and tore down the flyers, called campus security, and called the students fascists.